Welcome to the latest episode of Food Tech Stories. I'm your host, Food Tech marketing expert Megan Thomas. Food Tech Stories features the leaders pioneering new approaches to technology, collaboration, and storytelling in the food tech and ag tech space. Food and agricultural changing and fresh ideas and leadership are needed to sustainably feed the growing global population. Join us every other week as we talk to a founder, operator, or visionary in food and agriculture. We're talking about getting to scale, the investor outlook for the food tech sector. And today I'll be talking with two investors who are deeply involved in the food tech and ag tech investing space. Alex Kopelyan, Senior Director and Partner at SOSV's IndieBio, and Dan Altschuler, Managing Partner and Co-founder of Unovis Asset Management. First, I'm going to start with Alex. Alex, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Megan.
Wonderful. So how did you get your start in venture investing?
It was a little bit of a serendipitous path. My background is clinical, but I was very interested in kind of nutrition, preventive medicine, and that obviously ties to the food system very deeply. And back in late 2015, I got introduced to Arvind Gupta, who was a general partner at SOSV, the founder of IndieBio. Through kind of a series of conversations, I ended up joining the team in the very early days of IndieBio and have been there ever since, kind of working on finding, funding, and supporting startups.
The private markets have been challenging in recent years, as you well know. When do you think that's going to change?
I think for the space of food and ag, it is probably going to remain challenging for a while. Things are loosening up a little bit as some technologies reach scale and commercial adoption, but what we are really looking at is venture in particular is waiting for some exits and outcomes. And I think the space has been a bit lacking. We had some big ones during, Beyond Meat, Oatly came up and then have come down pretty significantly, which is because of the adoption challenges have created a bit more hesitation with folks. So we need to kind of get over that hurdle. And we're looking at, companies, technologies, and business models that make that easier for startups.
And do you think that anything needs to change within the ecosystem to drive some of that progress? Or do you think it will happen kind of because it's cyclical and it'll swing back around?
There are a couple of factors we look at. One of them is what are exit expectations and what is reality in kind of the food tech space in terms of how big do acquisitions tend to be and what does a public market investor look for if a company were to go public. Given the spaces that food acquisitions often tend to be in the ingredient and kind of B2B space, we actually are really looking at what are more capital efficient businesses than in years past. So how can companies not raise into late stage growth rounds where they have huge amounts of investment dollars that create a lot of pressure for them to be maybe a larger outcome than is realistic. So designing technologies and companies around leaner capital stacks, less fundraising, kind of more flexibility in outcomes has been a big one that we will help.
Have you found that to be a challenging transition for some of your portfolio firms?
The founders have been generally pretty adaptable. One of the jobs of a founder is both to be out there very proactively listening to, what are the whispers and winds that are happening in the market and how quickly people are to pivot in terms of the advice they give founders varies, but you also have to be internally driven with your cost of goods and scale plan. Our work with a lot of founders has been, how do you probably learn to work more with B2B partners, find ways to utilize the expertise and scale of a lot of the partners that they have. A lot of big food companies we think of them with the packages on the shelves, but in reality, they also are companies that know how to build factories and scale technology and ingredients. So partnering in that way is something that people are really proactive in doing.
Manage suppliers. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So which sectors within the food tech space do you expect to drive investment in the next few years?
A couple that we have been looking at, one has been in what is a broad category of kind of low capex biomanufacturing. One way that we've really looked at it, that is actually non-traditional capex and hardware. So there's actually a lot of innovation in the hardware and maybe the organism as well, or kind of the technology that can allow biomanufacturing to scale in a more modular way. So where you can kind of build a lower capex unit that can make revenue that makes you profitable, as opposed to needing to scale, 10 times before you can ever reach unit economics.
Right.
So that's one approach. We've also been really active in agriculture, so upstream in the supply chain. What are traditional inputs that growers use? And how can we lower costs, increase performance while also keeping really good margins for our startups?
Right.
Or drive very new innovation in terms of dealing with very aggressive pathogens that no one has answers for, or create new varietals and value through very fundamental innovation in the crops that we're doing.
Right. So looking beyond your firm, do you think that there are other factors kind of in the broader ecosystem in society that may be driving investment? Are there other things happening that are favorable to food tech and ag tech?
I would say on the favorability side is, food security is really top of mind for, in every geography. The U.S. is really, really good food production. We export a lot. Other kind of countries import and are trying to figure out ways that can balance that a little bit. So that's really top of mind across the world. Health and nutrition has been one of the kind of secular trends that consumers and big companies want. How can we make products that are better for you in very subtle ways that maintain taste and things that consumers love? Then on the pure sustainability side, I would say Europe is probably the one geography and continent where that is probably still most top of mind. A lot of regulation is really driving better, more traceable supply chains, lower inputs into agriculture and whatnot. Whereas in many places, that is obviously secondary or tertiary.
What has surprised you the most about your work in the space?
I would say I'm always surprised how little I know, to be frank. There's always such interesting new technologies, discoveries that happen in biology and deep tech, physical sciences, that there's just a broader space for things to happen, for innovation to happen across, and in so many approaches, and they come from all over the world. We funded entrepreneurs from at least 50 plus countries.
Is that right?
Yeah, and it's just, there's really smart people all over, and they're approaching these problems in very unique ways. I just try to keep an open mind, understanding that what I knew yesterday may become outdated, in a week or a month.
Right. In what ways do you think the investment community can help people connect across country lines and industries?
A lot of investors in food and ag tend to be fairly specialized or spend enough time where they build pretty robust networks across the world. It makes sense. A lot of these supply chains and companies that you're servicing are operating everywhere. So building syndicates of investors that cross countries and continents is really helpful. Finding corporate partners that are active and proactive and bringing technology across boundaries is really, really useful. It also takes entrepreneurs that are willing to oftentimes move and learn and adapt to other countries and cultures and pricing pressures.
Right.
So if you live in the Bay Area, you can, but it's much more difficult to build a global business unless you're really just supplying ingredients everywhere. Kind of need to be on the ground, meeting partners, understanding what individual consumers want, and how to build a company that meets that need.
We're talking today from the MISTA Growth Hack that's around biomass fermentation. So what role do you think that ecosystems like the MISTA ecosystem or others, what role do they play in driving food tech innovation, getting some of these products and innovations into the marketplace?
We've known MISTA for a long time.
Yeah.
We know the folks behind it since I think before it even began. And this type of work, building a really collaborative food system, let's say bring corporate startups together in this way, is something that wasn't always available. When companies have the go it alone mentality and encouragement, venture oftentimes is a very, you must disrupt and destroy this incumbent kind of minded, because so much value is captured there.
Yep.
In food, it's really, really hard to just do that. It's hard to imagine a world where Nestle or Bunge and all these major companies, Givaudan, they're going to be there.
Right.
And learning to work with them in collaboration. The way current food systems work in collaboration with many specialists is really important. With the biomass hack that we're at now and MISTA more broadly, bringing a lot of capabilities and expertise together, I think it allows companies to move faster and be capital efficient, because they're not trying to figure out and scale everything on their own. They instead can kind of share the burden in a way.
I think that there definitely has been attention to the differences between, say, the tech sector and ag tech, food tech, and that they're simply different. What conditions do you see as being different in the ag tech or food tech sector versus some other sectors that venture may fund?
Even food and ag have differences with each other, but let alone relative to...
I'd love to hear if you want to parse those apart,
Yeah. Pure tech, there's just very different economies of scale and methodology to scale. That's using a software layer is incredibly different than shipping a crop all around the world, processing it, making a finished good, etc. It's very different. People's pricing expectations vary. When eggs go up 10 or 20% in the grocery store, that really matters to everyone. And it's one of those things people don't want ever increasing premiums in their food system the way perhaps software can get away with. It's more of a non-essential in certain ways. But within ag and food, with pure food, it kind of comes down to you do have to really meet the consumer with the preferences that they express. And
that's right.
At periods of times, people thought it was sustainability forward. People would pay a green premium. You could scale into that. It's proven to be less true than people had hoped in most places. Taste remains king. So taste, performance, and that appeal. Health is, for some segments, always been important. I think and I hope that it's growing across the population. So meeting those performance characteristics. And then within agriculture, there's a whole other range of pressures. Growers themselves are not running typically high margin. Farmers have a lot of costs to bear.
Right.
And they're not capturing a ton of that. So you have to, one, go with how do you ensure you don't increase costs to growers while at the same time delivering like a tangible performance or operational benefit. So things like that really, really matter. So you have to prove out in a rightfully conservative industry that you're going to be beneficial and not a net negative to operations. The reality is that it's also a concentrated market and distribution, which can be very, very challenging for startups because you oftentimes relying on partners, and there's a lot of sharp elbows when it comes to some of the bigger crops where a lot of the value lies. Startups figuring out a way to build their own distribution to really be close to the growers, understand their pains, make sure they're getting data and knowing how to best use their product. Doing that, or finding ways to partner then in a durable way with the big players. And also, to ramble a little bit longer, agriculture, climatic variability is a big issue. A lot of people are really thinking about how do you stabilize yield, protect against outlier weather events. Not many products can go from one geography to another unless they're kind of the very generic NPK and nutrients.
The time to transition a variety or to a different region, it takes years, decades to see these innovations. I was extremely well articulated on your part. Let's delve into one sector of the food tech space, biomass fermentation. So what opportunities do you see in that sector?
One of the main reasons that I like it is you get rid of a number of the production costs that come from purifying, really specialty products and taking designer proteins or carbohydrates or lipids some of the higher value products have. So here you're going for a bit more of a lower cost of production on average. One of the advantages is it can, in a way, be often not always an invisible product in a sense, where you're working with large corporates that really know how to blend ingredients to create a desired trait, nutrition profile, whatnot. You have products that are slotting in for ones that are maybe less sustainable, less nutritious, etc. They maintain or enhance an experience instead of trying to make them adopt something entirely different oftentimes. So the biomass space, I think, is in a way an easy on-ramp into a lot of new food technology and new science. And I hope can be this proving ground where food tech can scale and be accepted by consumers because it's so seamless into their everyday for their wallet and their eating experience.
It checks many of those boxes. What other unique challenges within biomass fermentation that you see?
For a startup, there's always a challenge. How do you make sure to differentiate and how a long-term price or market advantage? Players definitely do overlap a fair amount. It still remains to be seen if large companies will adopt multiple new products or new ingredients in conjunction with each other, or will they really be trading off against each other? As that could kind of trim the market down. I think for a venture, the question comes to what is the returns profile here? In some ways, invisible ingredients and inputs are really desirable because they can just permeate many, many markets and many products. In other ways, they're inherently less prone to being premium or capturing extra value. While these dynamics really kind of play out, and then also that pathway to scaling up production. If you can find good partners to do that, that's obviously the way to go. At the low volumes, there isn't a product that can command a price premium typically. So you have to find creative ways to get across those valleys of death into providing enough just for your partners to play with.
Right. I've heard that from several founders about the challenges of working with larger strategics.
Yeah.
It can be quite challenging. I've really enjoyed hearing you talk about your work and what you see ahead. And looking to the future, what are you most excited about, Alex?
Kind of circling back to the beginning where I mentioned nutrition was a bit of my own land into the food space. I think I'm really excited about the overlap of better for the planet and better for the consumer and better for companies, win in every direction where economics can be helpful, or not just be helpful, but be really favorable for all the parties involved, where the health benefits to food as medicine, as opposed to being a specialty product, can be a bit more ubiquitous in all the things that we can get in the grocery. And also I think as we may perhaps ease a little bit of the pressure on our planet with some technology, or find ways to make traditional agriculture, more sustainable and viable for a very long time, while also helping ecosystems, or at least being neutral as opposed to oftentimes hurting them. I think those are all things I'm really excited about. And I think the food tech scene is really pretty young. It's roughly a decade for some of the more mature companies, a couple a tad longer than that. A lot of innovations happen in 10 years, and I think it's really just going to continue. I think we're going to be pretty wowed when we look back in 10 to 20 more if it can continue on this trajectory or better.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Megan.
My next guest is Dan Altschuler. And Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Megan. It's great to be here.
Great. Wonderful. So how did you get your start in venture investing?
I came through venture specifically through the back door. So my brief history, I was born and raised in Mexico City. And I have been involved in food systems in one way or another for more than 25 years. I started off in banking, and I had the opportunity to look at the financial operations of some of Mexico's largest food companies, like Maseca and Grupo Bimbo. After that, I managed a logistics firm, and I learned all about moving boxes from A to B for food service and CPG companies. Then I moved to the US, and I started working with different food companies and food manufacturers. I started importing food products of all types, and I got the entrepreneur bug, and I launched a CPG company that was dehydrating fruits in Mexico and selling them under a brand into the US market. This was circa 2004, 2005, with the rise of the Natco snack business. After that, I had a restaurant in New York City, and I also managed a creative agency with a lot of food service and CPG clients. So after all of that experience, I took some time off traveling with my wife, and we traveled all over Asia. And I got to see a lot of farms and a strong affection for the culinary arts. And when I came back to the US, I had decided on three things. One, I wanted to work on food, but the food of tomorrow, not the food of today. Second, I wanted my life to have impact, broadly defined. I didn't know what that meant yet. And third, I wanted to do all this work from a strategic point of view rather than operational. So that meant, at the end of the day, venture made sense to me. I started learning about what was happening in food systems in the US, and I saw several verticals, and one of them was alt proteins. And I bumped into my partner, Chris Kerr, and that's how I got into it.
Mm-hmm. You've definitely taken the road less traveled to get to where you are. So how do you think having that eclectic background has informed your work as an investor?
Several things. One, I've been able to live through all of the different parts of the value chain of food and really understand it from different perspectives. And so I'm able to have empathy with founders.
Right.
I have a lot of scars on my back, and I can understand many times why they are looking at things from a certain perspective. And on the other side, because I've been through all of these parts of the value chain as well, I can see where I can provide some guidance and some advice into what to do, many times what not to do. And sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, but I try not to be shy.
Shifting over to the industry in general, so the private markets have been challenging over the last few years, as you well know. When do you think that will change, and what will drive that change?
I think they have been challenging, but part of the challenge, I think, was the strong contrast to the years prior to the downturn.
Yes.
On one side, we had a lot of years where there was an overabundance of money looking for any sort of opportunity because interest rates were so low, so cash was freely available. On the other side, we had a global lockdown and all of those implications. And so next to all of that, right now we are in this valley that looks very doom and gloom. And at the same time, I think it's not that dissimilar to other economic downturns. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think from our perspective, you needed to have a lot of the companies go through the process. There were some companies that needed either to shift what they were doing, to pivot, or to close down and find another use for their resources, be it IP, be it cash in the bank. And at the same time, I think we needed to usher in the new generation of food startups. And I think we're starting to turn the page and starting to come into that new generation. And I'm very excited about what that new generation brings because if nothing else, it brings the learnings of a previous one. And when I look at all the founders in the past 6, 8, 10 years in food, which I have a lot of respect for, they didn't have a playbook. And so they looked at the playbook from other industries. And sometimes those don't translate into food because food is not SaaS. Food is not cybersecurity.
It does not.
You don't have the hockey stick. You have different types of economics.
Yes.
And so now this generation of founders will either come from the previous one and they'll have their own scars on their backs.
Right.
Or they will have people to turn to say, how did you do X, Y, and Z? I am very excited about that opportunity.
And I love the idea that it's informed by the past. Do you see any other differences with this second generation, new generation?
They're going to need to be more thrifty.
Yeah.
But thrifty is a good thing.
It is.
When you have a lot of cash in the bank, psychologically, we're going to be thinking we should put it to work. That's not necessarily the case. And then when you come across a fork in the roads, if you have the funding to do both options, you might try them out. The scrappiness is going to help entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be reflected in the P&Ls of their startups. And I think those will reflect more accurately those of the industry that they've chosen to be in.
Necessity is the mother of invention kind of comes to mind, right? That if you have limited choices, then you're going to take risks. It's that test and learn mentality.
And if nothing else, this is food.
Yes.
We need it.
We do.
This is not NFTs. This is not a better social media app.
Right.
We need more food for the world. We need the food that we consume to be better for our bodies. We need to reduce the environmental impact. Those are just facts. How do we do that? And how do we take technology that has been developed for other verticals? And how do we find the way to shift the economics to make it for food where there's so tight margins?
Your firm focuses on sustainability and food security. And how has that created differentiation for your firm?
So our firm, Unovis,
Yeah.
we are focused on improving food systems as a whole. The idea began with our first fund. The thesis was replacing animals within the global food
Right.
supply. Through that fund and the next one, same thesis, we invested in all these companies that were saying, can consumers get the same benefits of the food that they love, not using live animals? And so that is a work in progress. But a lot of the companies that we invested in have now had outsized standings in the world. And there's some of the most known names in it. Now we have decided to expand our investment thesis slightly.
Okay.
And so to broaden it, to identify other ways, how can we make more food? That means how can we increase yields at the field level? How can we reduce waste? How can we improve resource usage? Then the food itself, how can we increase its nutritional profiles? Improve its nutritional profiles. How can we reduce all of these additives that have a reason for being, but they're not so good for us? And then thinking of the environment, how can we live in more harmony? So that is how we're thinking about it.
Yes. Technology is part of that, but is there more to be brought to bear than technology to create that transformation?
Food industries, everybody is involved. You can't create a food startup just being in a cave away and programming it out and pressing send and expanding it to the world, where you might be able to do it with other industries.
That's right.
So it's very collaborative. Understanding who the different players are, what drives them, what are their concerns, their considerations, how do they work? It is a very large and fragmented industry. The technology in and of itself will have no value if you not bring it to a place where others can benefit from it. And I think this is particularly important when we're thinking about how to leverage existing resources. For example, if I develop any type of technology, but it requires a significant amount of investment to prove it out, in CapEx, in steel, and it probably won't get anywhere now that money is much shorter. Whereas if I shift my thinking and from the get-go when I'm developing it, I recognize what is the installed capacity and I work towards others, then I think that technology has a much stronger opportunity to come to fruition.
Right. And what role do you think that ecosystems like MISTA and others play in addressing what you just called out?
Well, I think MISTA is wonderful. First, you have very knowledgeable, very dedicated people here who understand, they come from some of the larger food companies around the world. And so they've been inside the trenches of these very large, elaborate organizations, and they understand the pain points. They want to bring a lot of people to the table and say, how can you add value here? And then they provide guidance and they say, you're on the right track. We need some revisions here. And those are very important. And those are very important, especially at the earlier stages of a startup. Like any tree, if you help it go straight, then it will. But if it takes a turn and it's just crooked from the beginning, it's going to be much harder to straighten it out.
That's right. I like that analogy a great deal. When we look into FoodTech and AgTech from an investing standpoint, which sectors do you think are going to drive investment going forward? Are there any that you're watching in particular?
We are very excited about modifying genes to improve, be it yields or nutritional values of different crops, doing so in a way that aligns with existing legislation around the world and that is easy to implement. and will bring net positive gains. We were very interested in some technologies such as molecular farming and understanding how we can use plants to produce all sorts of valuable ingredients that are already used. I'm very bullish around fermentation and the multiple applications we have, either for unique ingredients, for different types of for replacing things that aren't necessarily the best in our body, to improve functionality, to lower cost. At the same time, digital tools for food manufacturing, I think, are sorely needed. If you go to some of the larger food manufacturing facilities around the world, they still use pen and paper for many things. Technology hasn't arrived yet, but it's starting to arrive. So I'm very excited about all of these different ways. And also packaging. Packaging plays a very big role, unfortunately, in what happens after we've eaten the product. So how can we find packaging, or how can we rethink how food is transported across the whole value chain to reduce that impact, reduce resource usage?
Because there have been sustainable packaging options for decades, right? And that they haven't reached broad adoption, right? So such an opportunity.
There's a lot of opportunity. And if you look at the adoption, many times it's around economics.
Yes, it is.
Or sometimes it's around functionality. Yeah. I hate plastic. And at the same time, plastic is great for certain applications.
It is.
And we have to balance the health concerns, safety concerns of consumers with longevity. So shelf life is very important, with cost and with the environment. So I don't think that there is evil out there.
Right.
I think it's just there's a lot of things that we need to balance out.
It's challenging. Yeah. Yes. I'm very hopeful that we address that in a meaningful way and we start to see some real changes. So fascinating. So we're here at an event around biomass fermentation. Any tailwinds, headwinds, anything you're excited about in the biomass fermentation space?
So we've had the opportunity to work with some founders around in fermentation. One of the companies is Meaty. Another one is My Forest.
Okay.
And I think fermentation, in its different forms, if it's precision, if it's biomass, I think it has a lot of opportunity. I think it's something that will require introducing to consumers in a way that they can understand it, not talking down to them, but rather showing them the benefits from a positive point of view, and giving it time. For better, for worse, food systems take a lot longer to really embed into our daily lives. And being mindful of that, I think, helps the long-term success of these companies.
For sure. And taking that long-term view is going to be essential. The food system moves much more slowly than other sectors, right? For very real reasons, right? And so, I think that's going to be important to keep in mind. So, Dan, I've really enjoyed talking with you. Looking to the future, what are you most excited about?
I'm speaking with so many founders. I'm excited about it. There is a renewed optimism and a sense of urgency into what we're doing. And at the same time, I think we are putting a reset. The past 8 years, we went through this roller coaster. But if we look at where we are now as an industry in terms of technology for food and how the food systems are changing, I think we've come a long way. We have a lot to go, but I think we have come a long way, and we shouldn't discard that.
Yes, agreed. Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks for joining us today on the latest episode of FoodTech Stories. Be sure and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and keep an eye out for our bi-weekly episodes. I'm your host, Megan Thomas, founder of Ladris 17. FoodTech Stories is edited by TJG Media.